with only a couple weeks left until the election, one trend line has become clear. There's a new political divide in the tech industry, which has historically been a major base of support for particularly Democratic politicians. And here to help provide some context and make sense of what's happening is Roy Bahat. Roy currently runs Bloomberg Beta, a venture capital firm that focuses on the future of work, but his professional life has spanned time in municipal government, nonprofits, and media organization. He's also known for moving with his family from San Francisco to Wisconsin in the lead up to the 2020 election to help with get out the vote efforts. As a note to the members of the audience, please put any questions you have in the chat and I will pose it to our guest here. Thank you so much for joining us today,
Thank
Roy.
you for having me.
So about tech's political split, at least in the public view, it's appeared to happen gradually and then all at once with President Biden's debate performance and the attempt on President Trump's life as major pivot points. But what has that felt like in the industry itself? Are we sort of just seeing people come out of the closet that have been in this situation or having this political leaning for quite a while?
So I think that the real backdrop for it, the fact we can even have a split is its own trend. And what I mean by that is, so I first moved to San Francisco and got into tech almost 2 decades ago now. And tech at the time was not particularly politically involved at all.
Right.
So when we say it's been traditionally a place that's voted a certain way, yeah, if you ask people and polled them, my guess is like many Californians, they would line up a certain way. But the main story to me was non-involvement. And then what happened gradually over several cycles is the kinds of companies that people in tech backed became more had more points of interface with government. I think that people in tech just aged, and as you get older, you start to look around and think about different things, not always. And so that's kind of the first shift, is that there's just a lot more attention, period. And I mean, you know, candidates come through here at such a rapid clip, trying to raise money and build relationships and touch base. Then you get to, okay, this quote unquote split. And I say quote unquote because here's the part I can't tell, is tech is like many industries, but more so that it is really defined. The culture of the industry is often defined by just a handful of voices. We pay attention to the outlier startups. Right. You know, we pay attention to the people who have the most, followers. And so is this a broad split, or is it a handful of people who thought one thing and then thought something else? I'm genuinely not sure, but I think that's the question. And the kind of issues that I see under the hood, which is to say talking broadly with people in tech, are just it's less controversial than that, broadly speaking. And so, there's a VCs for Kamala group. It has tons and tons of members, that kind of thing. So I think that, I guess my one sentence answer is it a split, or is it just a handful of people who are famous and loudly broke another way? My intuition is it's more the latter, but we honestly just don't know.
Well, okay, so a lot of that conversation or the trend lines were sort of characterized by some of those voices on social media. And
some of them own the social media platforms,
exactly,
for example.
Or maybe a podcast or two.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But, when we've looked at actually donations, it's still sort of, that isn't actually coming across in where people, as the industry as a whole, is putting their money. Is that correct?
So I haven't looked at, I have not seen call it like a first dollar analysis of the industry as a whole. What I've seen is people focusing the donations on the mega donors, right. And the mega donors have exactly kind of the same issue, which is a handful of people who are really to put a lot of money where their mouths are can really skew it. So I don't know kind of from first dollar what it looks like. What I do know is we've seen a lot of Democratic candidates spend a lot of time in San Francisco, and they're not doing that unless people are giving.
Right. You mentioned owning their own social media platform, maybe owning their own media distribution platforms. Sort of what I'm seeing in terms of a kind of mistrust about a certain type of philosophy. It's hard for me not to think about 2016, 2017, which is like kind of, I would call it, the origins of the tech lash, where it's like tech was sort of just another industry, and then there became sort of a concerted force that kind of pushed back on the industry, and sometimes in very prominent and provocative ways. And it seemed to radicalize a section of the industry against certain progressive ideas, or at least the squishy idea of wokeness or something like that. as a kind of performative progressivism. I'm kind of curious. Do you see a through line from what we saw there to?
Yeah, I actually think the through line goes even further. For me, that the first notable moment in that through line was the Google bus incidents.
Yes.
Is a lot of it happened locally here in San Francisco, where people are starting to say, hold on a second, all this economic development, all this growth, it's not all good. It also comes with downsides. And I think that tech was caught relatively flat-footed at the time. I mean, I remember back in 2013, I tried to organize a group to provide people working in tech with just an education about San Francisco, partially because I wanted to learn too. At that point, I'd lived in the city a few years. I'd worked in New York City government, but I really didn't feel I knew San Francisco that well. And we went around to a lot of major tech companies. We're like, hey, we have this 2-day program where like your folks will spend 1 day in the classroom and 1 day walking around neighborhoods. And maybe we didn't do it right, but it was really hard to get anybody to say, well, you want my engineers to spend 2 days learning about the city in which we live? And so I think that there was a flat-footedness and disengagement, despite the fact that there were many people, Ron Conway being one of them, who were vocally and actively engaged. They were the exception at the time, not the rule. So I think it started then. And, to some extent, I think the tech lash is really about power. And the way in which it's about power is wealth as a form of power, ability to shape what people think about and see as a form of power. And tech has lots of it. So of course there's going to be lots of controversy over everything tech does. And it's not like I'm even sitting here, tech power and money expresses in media, it expresses in ownership of platforms, expressed in all these ways. And I think we should be examining it up, down, left, and right.
We talk about the local politics in particular. I remember talking to, just in terms of my normal everyday life, folks who worked in the industry back, during the last cycle or the cycle previously. And, they came to San Francisco mainly for their job. They were not that particularly interested in local politics. I think now I talk to a 25-year-old who knows about all these ballot measures and they can really speak fluently about the topics.
I think that's definitely true.
So I'm curious what's happening there. Is that because San Francisco has sort of become such a symbol of, let's say, a bunch of different things to different people? Or what is interesting?
I mean, I think the first obvious part is that they felt the consequences. They get that government is going to do things like affect what their rent is going to be and the supply of housing. And then we have had this wave of people in tech beyond the bold-faced names who have really started to engage, and they've started to learn about things and get involved in civic issues. And so I think that's percolating, and I think that's really healthy. I mean, like I said, I come from New York and we spend part-time in Milwaukee. Those are both cities that have really vibrant, deep, and old civic cultures, which candidly, I think San Francisco, while it has some of that, is still building that muscle.
Yeah, and part of that has to do with sort of the transitory nature of the folks who come here. Is that?
I think that's right, although DC also has really transitory folks. So I think it partially has to do, I mean, who knows why? Some of it may be the counterculture of San Francisco, because LA actually has really deep civic culture too. I'm not sure why it is. Maybe that San Francisco is a little bit of a smaller place. I mean, the population of San Francisco is roughly like a third of the population of Brooklyn. It's a pretty small, the city of San Francisco is pretty small. The Bay Area is bigger. And to be honest, I don't really know why. I think the important part is people are waking up and starting to figure it out. When you have like two 25-year-olds debating a ballot proposition, that's good. That's how the system should work. I mean, if you believe ballot propositions are a good idea, which I have mixed feelings about, but if they're there, then that's how the system should work.
Got you. We've been talking a little bit about how so much of this conception of tech sort of political stance right now is defined by some of these bigger voices in the room, elephants in the room, so to speak. But how would you sort of bucket the different groups of political thought within that? I mean, there's obviously some...
That's a good question.
There's like an accelerationist sort of movement within the tech industry that is pushing up against regulation and different forms of government intervention. And there's, sort of like the regulate us type. And there's a lot of folks in between.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that there are actually well-defined camps. So I'll say this, I see myself as an accelerationist.
Yeah.
I believe that, look, I'm a startup investor. We've backed companies that are very fast growth companies. We've been proud to be involved with San Francisco resident companies like Flexport that have been very visible. And I believe that we obviously have an economy where the government plays an active role. And the question to me is, which kinds of regulations actually accelerate innovation? Because some of them can. Some of them can, obviously, by creating a level playing field or lifting up the bottom so more people can participate in the economy. But even, look, I look at something like CHIPS, the federal government legislation, the CHIPS Act, the CHIPS and Science Act. Funding science, government's actually kind of the first venture capitalist. And so Silicon Valley exists here in large part because of defense contracts in the 50s and the aftermath of that and government-funded academic research. So I think it's really silly to be in I'm for acceleration and that means government keep your hands off versus not. I think, I'm now going to list off a bunch of issues. Crypto is a big issue for many people. Vibes. I used to be able to get a meeting in the White House and Obama came to visit our office, but now we can't get our phone call returned. That's relationships, and in a sales context, you would say, of course, people's personal relationships matter. Same thing happens in politics. You do have AI regulation as another theme, people who care about antitrust and tech and taxes. I mean, there's a whole wide range of issues. The only place where I genuinely have seen, I guess I'd say, camps is, and it's a tough issue, is post-October 7th, a whole range of people have arrayed themselves around issues around Israel and Judaism. And I see in the Jewish community, and I've got an active Jewish set of Jewish communities that I'm a part of, including one WhatsApp group of Jews in tech, and there are many of them, some of them who saw this event was going to happen, so maybe they're listening to us now. But I'll just say, there you have, if you are a one-issue voter, and I'm not saying people are, but if you are, I'll exaggerate the point, and your issue is how an administration handles the Middle East, then there's more of a division of camps and points of belief. But with the exception of that, which is not a particularly tech issue, I mean, there happen to be people in tech who care about it, I don't actually think, I think there's just a bunch of people marketing themselves and branding in different ways. Sure. And yeah, they end up supporting one side or the other, but I don't think there are kind of clean segments that are honest. I mean, we're all in tech accelerationists on some form, for example.
Right. It's hard to literally bucket people in these sort of small definitions.
Yeah, and they fight with each other. It's the question to me is how much of that is just a Game of Thrones among bold-faced names fighting with one another.
Well, on the bold-faced names issue, I mean, more than many elections I've seen in the past, people are just kind of going at each other in a different way. What does reconciliation sort of look like after that? Are these people going to still be able to work together, or is this all sort of kind of a theater that they're doing?
I think it's so. First of all, I think what's different is they all have platforms now, much more so than they had 15 years ago. Probably the same as 4 or 8 years ago. But they have platforms, and they love their platforms. Attention is a powerful drug. Here we are both having our hit of it right now. I think that for the most part, the next day, assuming the country is stable and there's not widespread civil disarray, I think the day after, people are going to shrug and be able to work together. I mean, I've definitely heard cases, I'll give you the counter evidence first, which I've definitely heard cases where somebody had committed to invest in a VC firm, and then the VC came out for one candidate, and then the LP was like, well, I don't know if I can support you anymore. It's I don't know, is it really going to affect your investment returns? Right. We're talking about mainstream candidates. It's not like somebody saying they're going to vote for, I don't know, Jill Stein or Chase Oliver or something like that. So that is a suggestion that it's in the air, but for the most part, I see these people continue to collaborate. They all work together. If they can make common cause on investing in a company, I think they'll set aside their barbs for the most part. I'd be surprised if not.
I want to go into a couple of the topics that you mentioned. One of them was crypto. This is the first election.
I am a low knowledge crypto person. I'll just warn you in advance.
Well, this is the first election we're seeing crypto as a really defined political force.
Totally.
I mean, money. And, in some ways, they've sort of cowed members of Congress because they're like, I don't want to be labeled anti-crypto. I don't want, money flowing to my opponent. I mean, is there a defined philosophy that they have there? Or is it just, they kind of want to just be somewhat lightly regulated or maybe push a lot?
I hear relatively consistent things from the crypto community, which is we want clarity. They say things, and again, I don't know the extent to which this is right because I'm not an expert, but they say things like the United States is the only major industrialized country where there isn't clarity about regulations around crypto. And so they just want to know the rules of the game so they can operate, which I think that's fair enough. But also I think there are valid public policy interests saying, I don't know if like the continued development of crypto is good for the typical American or not. You can make the argument both ways. And I'm a crypto holder, so at least with my wallet, I've voted in a certain way, but I don't consider myself an expert.
And then the other thing you mentioned is vibes. A lot of people like to think we're really debating policy and things like that. And particularly when we're talking about big money donors, big name donors, it is kind of based off of a relationship with an individual candidate, individual party, individual groups. And when I was listening to the podcast where Andreessen and Horowitz came out and said they were going to endorse Trump as a firm, that was one of the things they mentioned. They were like, well, we can't really get a meeting with the Biden administration. How much is the vibes of the Biden administration and its sort of way it kind of alienated tech, kind of a part in this?
Well, I'm going to separate vibes into two issues. The first one is just feelings about people and individuals. I think that's always going to matter. But the other one, which is relevant if you have a business interest, is access. Is a lot of these folks, believed that their ability to shape public policy depended on access. And when SVB went through what it went through, there was a lot of dialogue between Silicon Valley and the government about what was happening, mostly around, obviously people who had money at SVB were worried, but mostly around things like how much is SVB just serving tech? And the answer is it was in many, many other states. We had a founder we backed in Ohio who had her money at SVB, et cetera. But the access part really does matter, whether you like it or not. And I think that the Biden administration basically held a wall on it. Not entirely. They definitely had plenty of relationships, but it was different. And the vibes are already shifting on that.
Right. And because I'm a masochistic journalist, I spend a lot of my time on X. But
I'm so sorry.
But probably one of the biggest,
just for your mental health. Useful platform we all spend a lot of time on.
To camera. Don't.
Well, and actually, I should acknowledge a bias there too, which is X acquired a company where we were the lead investor. There were one acquisition.
Okay.
So we are small shareholders in X.
But one of the big characters in this drama has been Elon Musk, and
one of the big characters in every drama.
In his public statements, he has painted this contest as an existential threat, and sort of sharing a bunch of what many observers would call it misinformation. I don't know, It's so weird to see sort of influencer commentators that own their own platforms. Although maybe this is not just a new phenomenon, or it's just.
Well, it's definitely not a new phenomenon. Historically, plenty of media businesses were owned by proprietors who had political views.
Newspaper magnates.
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. And in a way, actually, I think that the current model of media ownership that exists sometimes, like public companies that are media companies, is the exception, not the rule. Obviously, public companies are a later phenomenon, but we've had proprietorships for a very long time. So I don't think that's so much the issue. I think what's different now is the speed and breadth with which you can reach the general public with something bite-sized that may or may not be true is kind of terrifying. And I do think that, this is back to your question about are there factions. It's really hard for me to tell when the arguments are principled versus self-interested. Like free speech is the kind of thing that's gotten weaponized as an argument, and it sort of can mean for some people free speech for my views, but not for yours. Or free speech means you can say something, but I get to decide how many people will see it or not see it. And so we are still developing, I think, our antibodies as a society toward and against that stuff. And TikTok has been, of course, a major factor in this. I think there's no question, looking at the data that I've seen, that what people see on TikTok is shaped by what the Chinese government wants people to see on TikTok. And so there are foreign actors, there are domestic actors, and we're all just trying to figure out where do we stand amidst all this.
When I think about the free speech sort of censorship debate, it's hard for me also not to think about 2020 and the kind of conversation that was happening around COVID and the pandemic, particularly online, where you actually had a lot of these big tech social media platforms come in and say, we're actually going to limit what people can say. And now there was obviously a reaction to that. Now they've pulled back a lot of those, let's say, firewalls, so to speak. How do you think what happened in 2020 in terms of the civil unrest, obviously the pandemic, and kind of what we were seeing in terms of the social justice movement around law enforcement?
Yeah, George Floyd aftermath,
exactly.
Black Lives Matter.
Where does that sort of play into sort of tech as a kind of general conception. Thoughts today?
It's a great question. I think that we have these popular ideas about free speech. So first of all, of course, like the First Amendment is about what government can do, not about private companies per se. And they come from, I guess I'd call it like college ideas, or salon society maybe is a more loaded way of putting it, where it's like, oh, in the contest of ideas, we should just be able to talk to each other and eventually the right ideas will come through. And I think that that's true. Of course, that's true. But what challenges that is, what if an idea that is factually false and dangerous can spread so rapidly that the marketplace of ideas doesn't have time, if you will? And I don't know how well the marketplace of ideas works over time, but let's assume it does. What do you do when an idea spreads that rapidly? And we just honestly don't know. We don't know where to draw the line, because it's clear that there are some things that are really dangerous and some things that are apparently dangerous, but not. And all these platforms are trying to do is set their different settings on the dial. And we just don't know. And I do think it's in large part, it's a technical, it's a policy problem for sure. And it's a technology problem of like identifying the things that are going to spread. What are they saying? And so I guess I feel like,
well, ultimately, isn't it just always like some person or people or team or something essentially making a content moderation choice of what we're
Sure, they
allowed?
might make it systematically by
Right.
deciding what rules to enforce, or they might be making it individually in a particular case when it rises to that, and different companies trying to put in structures and oversight boards and that kind of thing. And I think the honest, boring answer is we don't know how to manage this stuff. Like everybody who claims like we know exactly what to do, people can point at stuff that they reasonably think is horrible and not. And I think in the aftermath of this election, depending on what the outcomes are, we're going to have a lot of discussion about what was healthy and what was not healthy. I think it'd probably be more about X than it will be about Facebook this time, but we'll see. I'm not sure. It's been about TikTok. I mean, the Congress has passed a law about TikTok, and so we'll see what happens on the enforcement of that law.
Well, as was pointed out, that was essentially the only national federal technology regulation that they've passed in however long.
Well, and I think that you get to how do you make these judgments, and I think that if you have a domestic powerful actor, a business or a person that is shaping things, it is different in kind from having a foreign government have similar kinds of influence, or at least we have an American culture where we say, no, it's worse to have a foreign government influencing us in this way. And so to the credit of Congress, there was bipartisan broad consensus on that being an issue. And I think that's right. And I think they took a very American action in passing the TikTok legislation.
I'm going to move to one of these questions.
Yeah, please.
From CB, thank you for asking. Are you concerned that tech executives and their interests might be overrepresented in local politics due to their outpouring of donations to specific initiatives? Is this problematic? Essentially, is there an overrepresentation of tech interests in our local politics?
Well, I mean, I think that's a general question about money in politics.
Right.
And I think we all wish there were less influence of, well, we don't all wish this. I wish there were less influence, broadly speaking, of money in politics. But you try to do public financing of campaigns, and it can sometimes have opposite effects in certain ways. And so I think that is, for better and for worse, how our system works now. Do I think it is worse than that considering how our system works? No, I think that these entities are appropriately engaging. And by the way, I'd rather tech be at the table with government and with political candidates than unengaged. I mean, I love the idea of, when I worked in New York City government, I had the sense that the city government was multiple people in the city government were on a first name basis with all the civil society leaders. And that includes corporate leaders, it includes nonprofit organizations, it includes advocacy groups. And at least in tech, I think that has much been less the case historically. And I think it's a good thing to have that dialogue.
Well, speaking a little to that, typically the kind of traditional business corporate take on politics was, okay, we'll promote sort of pro-business interests, but we're going to kind of keep our political opinions definitely close to the vest when, at least generally when it comes to sort of major public statements. Sometimes they'll make donations and things like that. Because there's a fear of maybe alienating a portion of your customer base
sure.
or social sanction or something like that. tech may be missing on potential deals or connections with specific investors or something like that. Has that changed? Is there no longer that?
Oh, I mean, I think it still exists.
Right.
And you definitely see companies and individuals giving to both candidates an equal amount, which has always struck me as like just paying like a tax, basically. And I understand the reasons for it. So I think it still exists, but I do think it's a lot less. And what's amazing to me, so I spoke at something at the Aspen Institute about democracy at work a few months ago. And I was talking about one thing to me that seems totally uncontroversial, which is corporate leaders just pushing people to participate, to vote, to be civically engaged. And a CEO of a public company came up to me afterward. I'm not going to name him because I don't think he'd appreciate it. And he said, even the word democracy has become loaded. Even voting, pushing voting has become, internally to our own people, has become politically loaded, meaning it coded as supporting one side or the other, even if you were literally just telling people to get out and vote. And so to me, that's the real change. Is it's not so much, yes, it is true that I think we probably see some more corporate leaders expressing a side, but there's always been corporate leaders who like came out on one side or the other and use their money, use their influence. I do think founders tend to do it more often than hired CEOs because they feel like they have the moral authority over their company a little bit more, but that's just, I'm a founder guy, and so maybe that's just the bias of my perspective. But I think the real issue is this fear that just standing up for rule of law and our system has become loaded. You have people who support candidates on the left and the right saying that their candidate is the rule of law candidate. And so even that's become loaded, and I think that's what's really dangerous. So
it's fundamental sort of understandings of our
participation in our democracy. If I'm a CEO who tells my people, you should go out and vote, and that reads as a politically charged, meaning a partisan statement, that's wild that we've arrived in that place. Absolutely wild.
Well, it's like voter access or this conception of voter fraud, which used to be somewhat of a fringe idea. Now we're seeing like major...
Well, and I think that's one of the major misinformation risks is when prominent people lend credence to fringe theories. Sometimes they may be spotting something that's true before others were. I mean, I remember in the early days of COVID, there were some people saying like, this virus is dangerous, and other people saying, fringe theory, but turned out that was a fringe. Some things that start at the fringe and end up being correct. I think the issue is really where to draw the line, and there is nobody, who will watch the watchers. That's the scary moment that we're in right now, is we just don't know.
This is related to a question that we have. So how much does the FTC, in particular, the kind of strong antitrust angle taken by Lina Khan's leadership of the FTC sort of shaped people's opinions about this election in particular?
It does come up. I spoke to a group of college students in an entrepreneurship class, and they were in the Midwest, and somebody in the college class brought it up. And so it's clearly, that's one little data point, but I think it's very clear that it's become a flashpoint. I think it's as much symbolic as it is substantive. Again, back to the vibes thing. I think it's really important, but you can make the case both ways about how antitrust ought to work. I mean, one observation I made, we started our venture firm 11 years ago now. If the day we started our venture firm, you had, instead of investing in VC or startups, just bought the top 10 public tech companies, you would have outperformed all but the very best VC firms. And you'd have been liquid the entire time. And so it is clear that there is some question that's valid about the balance of power between big tech companies and startups. I think what's less clear is, are these particular policies of this particular person good or bad? There's obviously a bunch of folks who think it's unquestionably bad. I'm less sure. And I'll just say we did an event together with Y Combinator a few months ago exploring these issues around antitrust, and we had Republican speakers and Democrat speakers, FTC speakers. Lina was there, JD was there, Elizabeth Warren was there. And so the conversation about that at least surprises traditional party lines. And at the same time, obviously, founders who start companies, the core issue is they need to be able to get liquidity. And it's harder to take a company public than it used to be. And if M&A is also harder, then all of a sudden you realize you have, relatively few options.
Speaking of that event, because I was reading some of the coverage of it, it was interesting to see alignment amongst the Y Combinators, accelerator types of the world, and Lina Khan, making the argument that we are in a corporate environment where we have these large tech companies that are essentially monopolies in maybe some of their fields, controlling a large portion of business, access to capital, access to information. And the argument made by Gary Tan and others is that, we want little tech to thrive. Is there actually kind of an interesting split between that little tech and big tech?
Yeah, there is to a degree, although here's the confusing part for me, or at least what muddles it, is everybody in little tech in the venture-backed startup world kind of wants to become big tech.
Yeah, right.
And so
that's the point, right?
Is big company X a problem for you because they're holding a ceiling down over your head? Or is that who you aspire to be or who you want to have acquire your company? And the answer is it's both and. And so as a result, the answers are really unclear. I'm thrilled that Lena, I think, is responsible for us having the conversation in a different way. And I think that's a huge positive. I mean, I think the idea that the antitrust standard in the US moved away from, or is moving away from, only consumer prices being the evidence that you could have a corporate concentration of power is smart, because there are other forms of power. There's power over employees, there's power over suppliers, and I think it's really credit to this administration that they've introduced these issues.
On the vibes point again, I've read some commentary from pretty prominent, I would call them Democratic tech figures, who criticize the party and criticize the administration for alienating the industry and people like Elon, because of sort of maybe personal disagreements rather than letting that overshadow maybe their importance as cultural or economic forces and truly influencers. I mean, do you think that argument kind of has weight?
So I think the vibes argument has weight. I think Elon's a special case in so many ways that I just look for, like some venture firms, when they report their results in startup world, you're defined by, in many ways, the financial results are defined by the highest performing companies. And there are certain venture firms who, when they report their results to their investors, take out their highest performing company because they're trying to say we're good even without that outlier. And so let's look at it without the outlier for a second, because honestly, we could spend hours just debating that one case. I think one of the major differences between the Biden administration and the Obama administration is the Obama administration had plenty of people from tech who people recognized, knew, trusted, serving in prominent roles. That happened less often, if at all, in the Biden administration. And that's the kind of thing that can also really create trust. It's like, oh, I know that person's really good, and they're now the deputy CTO, or they're in charge of data, or whatever it is. Or at least they come from a similar professional background. And so, to me, that's one of the bigger indicators, much more than any policy action, because the reality is the policy actions have directly affected, I think, relatively few people in tech, but the relationships are much more important. And I do think there's also a growing back on tech engaging in politics. Another indicator I have on that is it used to be that if you sold your company, or you had a stint at a startup and you did well and you figured out what you were going to do next, you'd think about whether to start something else, go to some, go to a VC firm, something like that. And much more often now, people are thinking about doing a tour of duty in public service. They're asking, can I find a way to, serve in the armed services? Can I find a way to go work for a government agency? And you have nonprofits like Code for America that have helped facilitate that. And so I think that tour of duty mentality of I'd like to go serve the public is really healthy and can produce some stitching. But then if an administration doesn't want any of those people, then it can produce, a bunch of people who are I wanted to. Now, there are plenty of great people in tech who've worked in various parts of the Biden administration, plenty of folks who work for the governor. I mean, there's lots of places where it's happened. Less so, by the way, in the city of San Francisco. That's always surprised me as to why the city government of San Francisco doesn't employ more people who come from its fastest growing industry.
It is very surprising to me.
Yeah, it just seems weird to me.
No concerted force in that way. I mean, the only thing I remember was a press release after the Twitter layoffs happened was hey, come work for us. And then there was no follow-up.
And I don't know how much of that, my sense is that there is much more interest than there used to be. I mean, you see the tech involvement in things like YIMBY. There's so much interest in engaging on some of these issues that I hope to see many more people serve in government. I mean, I got to do it earlier in my career, met my wife there, got to spend time really learning, and it was among the most professionally rewarding times I've ever had in my life.
We've been talking a lot about tech regulation as one of the major policy issues that plague the industry. But if we're kind of going to zoom out globally, this is somewhat an election about immigration is one of the main issues. And immigration and the tech industry have a very strong tie in terms of labor and getting skilled labor working at some of these companies. But I haven't really seen it come up as a major policy issue. Is that just my perception?
No, people have tried to bring it up. I think it's gotten a little bit lost in the noise, but we have a skilled immigration, in my view, crisis in the United States. I mean, we have a founder, first of all, we write visa letters for founders relatively frequently. It's important to try to have good talent be able to stay in the United States. And we've had crazy cases where it's like, a person who totally deserves to be here on the merits can't get the visa, has to go live in Canada and build their business from Canada. So our country is losing out because of a failure to embrace skilled immigration. And we have this fortunate thing that a lot of countries don't have, which is people want to live here. And we should be taking advantage of that. And I think that in the broader national conversation about the borders, which is not really what we're talking about in tech, it's gotten a bit muddled. And it's one of, many examples where the phrase that the people in politics sometimes use is people being cross-pressured. They're cross-pressured by the vibes, meaning there's one pressure one way, which is fear of the immigrant taking my job, which I don't subscribe to, but some people feel and say, and is visceral for them. And another pressure, which is we know we need more skilled leaders in order to be able to build companies, invest in America, and actually grow. And so, another example of those kind of like cross pressures, I spend a lot of time with organized labor. We invest in the future of work. I think that the evolution of organized labor is, in addition to AI, probably those two are the two most significant trends affecting work in America. And you see the debates among working class populations about which candidate should they support. So it's not just in tech that the traditional lines have gotten confused.
This is kind of outside of the scope of the conversation about politics, but this is a question.
If it's a good question, is it from Anonymous? Because I don't know. I'll answer Anonymous's question.
From Anonymous. Yeah. Given the job market, lack of IPOs, mature companies, how should young people starting out in tech be thinking about the industry?
It's an awesome question. I wish I had a great answer for it. I'll say I face it with my own kids, not asking me about tech, but asking what should I do? Not that necessarily care what we think, but but they do ask. And the only thing I can say is that if you think you're going to have some simple one-line answer and it's going to last you your whole career, those days are long gone. And I think capacity to rapidly adopt new tools and learn them, regardless of whether you go to a big tech company, go to a startup, whatever you end up, be an investor, do something else. I think that is the name of the game. I mean, all the people who were using the Notebook LM podcast creation feature as soon as it came out, who yesterday, when Anthropic released its tools that allow you to actually manipulate your computer through the prompts, and a company we invested in called Replit immediately launched a partnership with them on day one. It's those companies and people who are just going to be fast at trying stuff and know the timing and dosage of how to not fall for the hype. Chances are, I don't really believe that the NFT adherents are the ones who are going to, necessarily chart the future. Actually, that's not true. NFTs may not chart the future, but the willingness to experiment and try stuff is going to mean some false starts or temporary false starts anyway. And so that's the single piece of advice I'd give. Sort of be the rapid learner in your own life.
Well, you've worked in the technology industry as an investor for quite a while. I mean, is the rate of change we're seeing in terms of AI right now just at a different level of magnitude?
Yes. I mean, it's
super destabilizing for a young person who's graduating
for sure.
Scary,
for sure. I mean, look, people saying being a computer scientist is going to be like being a typist. Right. I don't know that that's true. So first of all, we've been investing in AI since the year after we launched our fund. So I think we were the first VC firm to say we plan to focus on investing in AI, and that was 2014. At first, I thought, well, maybe AI is really big. Maybe it's as big as mobile as a trend. I was like, no, it's definitely bigger than that. Maybe it's as big as the internet as a trend. Now I think it might actually be as significant as all of software to date. And the speed with which the tools are getting better to allow people to be more productive, we professionally focus on this, and every week I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that I could do that kind of a thing. So I do think it is a wild difference. And I'm not really a believer that, I think people in tech tend to adapt really quickly. So I'll give you an example of this. 9 or 10 years ago, I was very involved in this idea that like everybody should learn how to program, that it could be a mass occupation before all the coding boot camps and all that, or when they were just getting started. And I went to go see the person who was then teaching one of the intro, or maybe the intro computer science course at Stanford. And what he said to me was, nobody learns to program anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's just all abstractions, meaning when he had learned to program, it was like understanding how a chip works.
Oh, right.
And like machine language and assembly. And now it's become much more abstract than that, much more like plain language, and it's getting even more so. But I think the nature of thinking about what software you want to build, what do you want to create in this world, and then understanding the trade-offs required to do that. The tools can get better and better, but at the moment at least, that's still something that is incredibly valuable.
This is related to a question that we have in the chat here. We've talked a little about the angling of the Obama administration and the Biden administration towards the tech industry. What was the angling of the Trump administration to the tech industry? I mean, we all remember the famous Tim Apple comment, but
I mean, it was like many things with Trump, it was it was erratic. He had in his transition some folks from the tech industry involved. Like there was a moment in the beginning, I mean, I felt this way too, by the way, when Trump was elected that night, he gave this speech at the very end of like the party.
Yeah.
And he said something about, it was a short speech. He said something about like, we're going to bring a lot of jobs to America, invest in infrastructure. I was like, oh, maybe all that crazy was just a head fake for the election and now he's going to govern with sanity. Obviously, that is not what happened. And I think the way he related to tech was like that. He had an advisory council. People would try to join, then they'd step off because it was too controversial given everything he was doing. A lot of the things that happen around reproductive rights, many women working for tech companies are like, I'm now not going to be able to go work in a state that is all of a sudden going to be more dangerous for me to work in. And so I think that it was erratic. And to me, as a business person, there are many things I want from government, but the fundamental one is predictability. I want to know what the rules of the game are, have them not shift underneath me, and I fear the erratic leader.
Right. Yeah, you don't want the rules to change on a
you can't plan.
tweet basis.
Well, and look, as an early stage startup investor, one of the things I didn't realize getting into this is companies can take a decade to reach fruition. What I didn't realize about that is it means they need to be resilient across many different kinds of cycles, political cycles, macroeconomic cycles. Like in effect, you're a kind of a macro investor by being an early stage startup investor because you can't predict what the window is going to look like 11 years later or whatever it is. And so especially for early stage startups, that erratic shifting of sands can be really destabilizing.
This is related to another question. In terms of AI regulation, obviously it's a big topic. It was a huge topic in San Francisco and in California with the legislation
1047.
Yes, by Senator Wiener.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read some of the kind of like policy documents put out by the Harris camp and then the Trump camp. It's light in details, and who knows what that stuff will happen. Do you think AI regulation would change that much regardless of who is in the White House?
Oh yeah, I think it could change a lot. I don't know exactly how, but I think that this administration's executive order I thought was a great step in the right direction because my basic view is we don't yet know all the ways we need to correct for things or constrain them. But we don't even have the information to have a great public conversation. So disclosure, transparency, public investment in alternatives to the private options, those are the things that I think are unquestionably behind a good AI policy. So Cal Compute, which was the public investment.
Public cloud.
Public cloud. I think those public options are really important. And I think in AI, they're really important. I think it's great to see the federal government looking at what it can do. And so I like the Biden administration executive order very much. I think they've hired great people to go bring that to life and like really talented people who know the industry and know the trade-offs. And I honestly don't know what to expect under either administration on this issue.
Right. Okay. We'll see. Stay tuned, folks. You mentioned the CEO who went up to you and talked about, even things that previously were kind of anodyne pro-democracy issues are now polarized. Yeah, coded. I mean, have you seen this? Obviously, we're seeing political polarization impact our society and our relationship with each other in all these different ways. But have you seen it impact, innovation or recruitment or collaboration at the company level?
I think that it can happen. I think we're actually getting better at this. So I think in the aftermath of George Floyd, we had so many raw wounds as a country that had existed for a long time and were resurfaced. And a lot of those raw wounds expressed themselves at work. And I think around Gaza, there was another wave of those. And now I think companies, whether they're the kind of companies that don't do politics or talk about it all the time,
right.
I think folks have found their own ways to navigate this stuff. So we built the muscle, we built the antibodies in order to have good conversation. I think that's really healthy. And I mean, look, people have different philosophies as to whether you should bring your whole self to work or not. But regardless of whether you do, things are going to come up at work. They're going to touch you as a human being, and you're going to have to figure out what to do about them. So I think it's less of an issue than it used to be. And I think that's a good thing.
You mentioned the TikTok legislation because I thought it was interesting as a national security issue, a foreign actor coming in and trying to influence mainly teens' minds or whatever, the way that we view the world. I think one interesting thing that I've noticed is almost a growing subgroup within the tech industry, America First, as a kind of centralized philosophy. In some cases, like Andrew Real or Palantir, maybe they're defense contractors, and that makes sense for them from a business perspective. But are there people now investing around this thesis or forming companies around that philosophy?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the number of So my story of the tech industry, like over many decades, starts out in the first couple of decades, maybe the first 3 decades, we're really about making devices. They're about making computers. You start making some software, but it's about devices. Then it's about manipulating information for the most part. I mean, with the exception of Amazon, all the big winners of the first 20 years of, tech boom in software were companies moving information around. There were media companies. They were, they monetized through advertising or, ... or getting paid directly for subscriptions for the software. Now, as of, 10 or 15 years ago, we began to enter this era of all the other industries. And so you have housing, logistics, transportation, education, and of course, defense is a really critical part of that. There's a long history of collaboration between the U.S. Department of Defense and technological innovators. It gets better and worse at different times, but I think it is essential to our national security. So I think that's changed. And I think an interesting wrinkle in that is many, many tech founders saw their companies and themselves almost as above nation states, as like citizens of the world. And crypto reinforced this for a bunch of people. And what we've realized in the last few years is actually nation states are still deeply relevant. If you're sitting here, it sounds obvious, but you're sitting here in the U.S. and you're a patriot, you might want to do things on behalf of your country.
Is that sort of part of this larger kind of like societal pushback to the globalization movement?
I think that's right. I think it fits with that. I think it maybe is our part of tech. And, we've invested in companies that help other software companies to host their stuff in different countries. I mean, the idea that it would be balkanized in this way wasn't an obvious call 10 years ago. But now it seems increasingly more siloed by nation or by sphere or something like that.
You were saying that two of the topics of most interest to you, both as an investor, maybe as a person within the industry, is the rapid development of AI and then labor. Obviously, we've sort of seen the way that labor has reacted to this new type of technology, which may end up replacing some job functions. Do you think the tech industry will ever be a unionized or become a labor organizing force within that industry itself?
I don't know. Microsoft is the test case here of how it can develop in a healthy way, because the alliance between Microsoft and labor unions to do things like learn about AI together, anticipate impacts, have regular dialogue. Microsoft declared neutrality about whether or not its employees organize unions. They did it for their own reasons, but I think we're going to have a little bit of a natural experiment. And, the interesting thing I think about labor organizing is sometimes just the fact that it could happen can be a pressure for both employees and companies to do things differently. And we'll see. I think that what's been interesting about AI is the occupations that seem to be most at risk have shifted. And so generative AI makes people in information. Illustrators were not that worried until Midjourney. Right. And there's valid reason to be worried. And the interesting thing is most of the information occupations tend to be less unionized. You do see, of course, exceptions like the Writers Guild made AI a really important issue in the Hollywood strikes, and we're going to figure it out together.
We'll see on that front as well. I guess this is probably a question I should have asked in the beginning. How much does politics actually come up when you're just talking to companies about what they're trying to do, or when you're trying to talk to co-investors?
So when I talk to a company about investing, basically never comes up. Right. We'll sometimes ask about ethics questions that are, when we're public about this, you can go on our website and see the questions we like to ask, along with a lot of other information. But one of the questions we like to ask is, if your company is successful, what's the dark underside? Right. Because there is always, or almost always, some dark underside. And we're not asking because we're expecting the founder to have it all solved on day zero before they even have a thing that's working. We're asking to just get a sense of how aware are they? I had a founder once send me, but like, those are unintended consequences. We're not responsible for those. And I was like, I don't think that's how that works.
And the last 10 years of a conversation.
Yeah, around that, so we'll engage in dialogue, but honestly, it hardly ever comes up.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, randomly talking to people in tech, catching up about things people I've known for a long time, people know that I'm politically engaged, and so maybe it comes up relatively more often for me because of that.
So one of the framing questions was like, tech is being a kind of democratic or liberal stronghold. You were maybe saying it's more tied to kind of a West Coast California ethos that sort of exists.
And I don't think tech has ever been cleanly liberal in the way that, to the extent you could characterize it, and David Brookman's a professor at Berkeley, and he's done a bunch of research on this. Tech just had an idiosyncratic package of views that didn't cleanly align with any one particular party orthodoxy. And so tech's going to be weird, I hope, for the rest of time. Because if tech weren't weird, then I think we'd have a worse world.
Competitive advantage of tech,
Yeah,
right?
Look, I think it's like all these things, it's so boring to say, but it's timing and dosage. You want to be weird enough that you can see things before others see them and be willing to introduce them, but you want to be not so weird that you corrode the society and end up harming people.
What are the major U.S. competitors in tech? I assume those are nation states, would be like China, things like that.
Yeah, I think that there's no question that China is far and away to the extent you think of it as a competition, is the competitor. I don't always think of it that way. What I think about is China's national interests are not our national interests. There may be deep conflict in many, many ways. The animosity certainly seems to have grown. One of the major shifts, I think, in my life in tech is this part of the whole country going from like, let's work closely with China to, wait a minute, maybe we should compete. What I definitely think is in our national interest is the ability to produce the technology that we need. If we can't make chips in our country, if we can't do advanced manufacturing, we're just vulnerable. And I think robust systems don't have single points of failure, and we shouldn't have a point of failure that is a country that is a possible adversary.
So one of the things that we've sort of seen in terms of the political polarization and the way that tech has sort of fragmented our information systems, sort of we're all in the kind of these individual information silos. Is there a way, particularly maybe once we get past the immediate contentiousness of this election, for tech to actually help engage us, bring us together? Have you seen evidence of that? I'm trying to be a little bit of an optimist on this front.
I appreciate your optimism. If there is a way, I don't know what it is, and I would love to hear from the people out there. No, because I'll say, here's what, 2016 happens, right? Trump gets elected, and a lot of people caught by surprise. Of course, almost everybody's caught by surprise. And the number of people who pinged each other, me, others, in the immediate aftermath, like, we're going to go solve polarization. We're going to make a news service that shows both sides and only shows the truth or rate the truth. And I'm like, really? Is Zuck coming to your meeting? Okay, no, you're not going to fix it. And like, let's go rent an Airbnb and cook it up. And instead, what we did in our family, my wife and I got our friends together. We said, we don't know what to do, but we want to tell you what we're working on and hear what you're working on and just support each other. But I think there is this tech, again, it's sometimes wonderful and sometimes to a fault, this like, we can solve anything. Just open up the IDE and give us a problem and we can figure it out and we can solve it. I don't have a good theory of how tech does that. I think that my theory of what does that is shared experiences do that. And we have very few national shared experiences.
We don't have a shared TV show anymore.
That kind of stuff. Not reading the same papers.
Right.
And, a reason why I'm a big proponent of things like national service is because I think it can create an opportunity for people to have meaningful shared American experiences. Now, using some of these tech platforms using Instagram as a shared experience, but what we experience on it is not. And I think that's the currency of the realm for mutual understanding is people getting to know each other.
One question here, and
Yeah.
we're getting to the end of our time, so if you have any questions, please put it in. What are your thoughts on the administration's efforts to make up ground on advanced manufacturing? I assume the CHIPS Act and related.
I think they passed historic legislation and are now full force trying to implement it. I think it's hard to plausibly imagine that an administration could have done better for trying to make those investments and cultivate those relationships. I think it's some of the wisest industrial policy we've had in America in a very long time.
And so we'll end with this closing question. If there's one takeaway you'd want people to have from this conversation, or the way that you're thinking about, this political conversation over the next couple of weeks and whatever the next 4 years may look like, what would that be?
It would just be the typical do something, get engaged, learn the issues. Ideally, if you have some time, specialize in some issues that deeply matter to you and be the person who explains those issues, those candidates to your friends. We can't all be experts in everything, but you can pick something. And if folks don't know how to get engaged, I'm easy to find on the internet.
Awesome. Well, Roy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. That was awesome. Great conversation.